I'm seeing 23 people. So including the staff I know that are on. I think we got a few stragglers, but we can go ahead and kind of get things going. We got a little bit of background and context. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. This is our first kind of kickoff meeting for the Urban Landscape Conservation Task Force, and really excited to get this underway, and really appreciative to all of you. So I guess I will dive into my slides here, but wanted to give a big welcome and thanks to each task force member. And for those that are out there listening in, we are live streaming this to YouTube for this meeting. We may not always do it that way. We may either record or record and post, or if we're doing an in-person meeting and it's really breakout intensive and that's not practical, we may just post these online, and if people want to come in person, they could do that as well. But I'm Russ Sands. I'm section chief for water supply planning at the Colorado Water Conservation Board, and I will introduce the rest of my team. There's several of us that are on, and probably a few people that I didn't formally put names on the slide. So I'm just going to go ahead and give a shout out to Hannah Porter on our team and Vivian Pinelli, who I know are kind of helping. It always definitely takes a village to get a good Zoom meeting off the ground, as many of you know. So let me just start by giving a little bit of context for the group. And while I'm doing this, if you want to go ahead and put your name and affiliation in the chat for now, that might be a good way just to let people know who you are. You should be probably familiar from some of the postings that we put out of the other task force members, but let's do that for now. And then we're going to give you, here in about 20 minutes or so, we're going to kind of turn the keys over to you and ask you to give a more formal introduction of yourself. So let me give a little bit of context here first. So just, I think the question came up, and we actually did some early on interviews with all 21 of the task force members. So it's been busy dropping 21 calendars on your meeting on top of everything else, and certainly appreciate your time as well, because I know each of you are busy. But just thinking back of, where we've been, we've just seen this deepening drought. And I just, April is probably not the most representative month, honestly, for how bad drought has been in the last few years, but just to kind of be topical for month to month where we're at now, I threw just some of the past drought maps in for 2019, 20, and 21. You can certainly see that deepening of drought. And then of course, maybe looking at a more representative month of when things are getting particularly warm and peaking, you look at like July 2021, and you can certainly see the impacts across, really that whole Colorado River basin. Interestingly enough, we were having a pretty wet spring on the east slope then, so we kind of had this almost opposite dynamic as we do today, and I've got a picture of that to show. But as we got into 2022, that drought, maybe the intensity of it in certain areas wasn't as bad, but when you compound dry year on dry year, there were certainly cascading impacts, and I think everyone was feeling the pinch. We had a lot of things happening. Some were on track anyway, and some really as a result of these deepening drought conditions. So the basin implementation plans were completed in that January of 2022, and we released those, and drought was certainly on the mind of all, if not many, if not all of the basins. We released in that June the draft water plan. We had the passage of House Bill 22-1151, so that's our turf replacement program that's really providing some seed money to help really try to advance turf replacement across the state. We had a MOU, a memorandum of understanding, that was signed on to by multiple municipalities, really inside and outside of Colorado, but in Colorado, places like Castle Rock, Denver Water signed on to that. It was really, among other things, a commitment to reduce up to 30% non-functional turf in their areas, in their service areas. And then Castle Rock and Aurora had some pretty innovative new turf limits that got put out. And that really, the synergies around all these things and this focus on just outdoor water use and turf replacement had CWCB launch into a little bit of a exploratory analysis of what we might expect those savings from turf replacement to be, and really understand that could be a spectrum, but trying to understand, a conservative estimate of what we thought was realistic and what that might mean financially too, certainly high cost implications. And then we presented that at the Colorado Landscape Summit. So this is now back in November of 22. And all of this is kind of the backdrop for coming into 2023 with the draft water plan now approved by our board on January 24th. You can see drought is still an issue coming into that year, but now it's really shifted, right? And certainly we see that today even more so than it was in January, with that almost opposite dynamic I talked about, where the east slope, and currently we have, I think, 23 counties that are in a declared drought stage right now on the eastern slope. But on the west slope, we kind of have, again, heavy precipitation and a lot of great snowpack for most basins, the Arkansas being a big exception, where they've been really experiencing it kind of throughout this process and are still have several challenges. So this is the backdrop coming into the water plan. It shaped, honestly, a lot of our thinking. There are many actions, agency actions in the water plan, and even the threads for partner actions, the things that we expect others might do or come in for grants for, to kind of advance this drought planning space. And in the water plan specifically, we call out also this goal in Action 1.7 to identify turf replacement options that support transformative landscape change, or we like to say, to give your lawn some TLC, but thinking about what are those climate adaptive landscapes that we need to be building today so that we're ready tomorrow, because we know these things don't happen overnight. We know that they're going to take years, and they're really the compendium of many things, often not one thing. It's not turf replacement alone. That's not going to be a silver bullet. That's one piece of the puzzle, but we need things like codes, and we need things like what we're going to replace that plant material with, and greater efficiencies in outdoor irrigation. So there are many things that kind of accompany this. And again, this being the backdrop to then the governor's speech at Water Congress, when he announced a few things. He announced the drought summit that he wanted CWCB to host. So that's coming up May 31st and June 1st. And then he also announced the Urban Landscape Conservation Task Force, and for CWCB to lead that effort. So he said, and I went back and had listened to the recording, but he said the Urban Conservation Landscape Task Force will focus on advancing these efforts in ways that go beyond turf removal, turf grass removal as a starting point, and advance Colorado scaping. So understanding that term is maybe not fully defined, but I think just this idea that we can do something better. In one of our one-on-one interviews, I loved that one of you said, we need to stop putting in the landscapes that don't serve us and start putting in the ones that do. So some other things that the governor touched on in that presentation were lasting outdoor water savings, really the permanence of these savings, not just replacing turf once, and then somebody scrapes the property and puts turf back in. We can't really afford to do this twice. At our landscape summit, I remember Peter Mayer said, we can't really afford to do this. The costs are probably going to be in the billions, but we certainly can't afford to do it twice, right? We need to make sure that we're getting lasting, sustained savings, and do that in a responsible way. So another thing the governor spoke to was responsible and resilient landscapes. I think one of the things I really appreciated in one of our one-on-one conversations we had with a task force member is being resilient means being resilient to all the things, right? Like right now, especially on the west side, we're thinking a lot about like flood conditions, right? So it's flood, fire, drought. It's all the things. There's certainly things even in the turf bill that speak to defensible space, right? So being, what are these landscapes that are going to serve us, that are going to really provide multiple benefits and be resilient to a variety of challenges and really uplift our communities. We talked about connecting land use and water use more. We know that's such a critical piece. And in the water plan, of course, we talk about One Water. And in the context of the water plan, we talk about that really being that critical nexus between connecting land use planning, water conservation, and alternative water supplies. And it's really those three things, combined with some political will often and regulatory ability, to move some of these things forward. Affordable housing, topic near and dear to the governor, and you've probably heard a lot about in recent speeches that he's given, but he makes this connection that, housing policy is water policy and the two are connected. And then again, drought lessons learned and this call for the drought summit. So all these things kind of interconnected and bound up in us realizing that we need to have a little bit more of a robust conversation around outdoor landscaping. And if we're going to meet this future, what does that future even look like? And have we defined that? Or what are the things that we need to explore more? And where do we have agreement of just the smart things that are going to make sense, that are really going to advance Colorado? And so that's really where you come in. And as we talked with each of you, you had asked us, how do you I'm hearing what you're saying, but help me put this into a succinct mission statement or problem statement. And so this is kind of a pass at that, but the Urban Conservation Landscape Task Force is working to identify opportunities that can provide sustained outdoor water savings in ways that support vibrant communities and avoid unintended consequences. And I think, we pull that term vibrant communities as one of the 4 areas of the water plan, and important to note, just because it comes up, and it's important that it does come up. But when we think about those areas of the water plan, they're really interconnected, right? When we're thinking about vibrant communities, we're also thinking about the farms that are connected to our cities, or sometimes our ag-centric cities. We're thinking about the waterways that go through our cities and ecosystem benefits, and how we keep those waterways clean and healthy for water quantity and water quality issues. And we're thinking about resilient planning, and that has a strong piece of both thinking about our climate challenges and understanding those, but also thinking how we can adapt to them. What are those solutions? How we can get those out, the education and outreach side, and how we can be more inclusive about that. We really need to bring together everybody. When you're facing dire challenges, you certainly don't want to leave anyone out of that equation. You want to bring everybody together, because we're going to need everyone pulling the same direction. So this is kind of the task at hand for the Urban Conservation Landscape Task Force. And of course, we've talked through this a little bit, but this being our first public meeting and just wanting to kind of get that out there. This is a bit broad, but we're really rooted again in that context that I set up for you. So I will say thank you for being willing to take on this task, and for, again, the time that you gave us early on, just to kind of level with us of what's on your mind, or how you were responding to some of the things that we had initially teased out that we thought this task force could help us think through. And I'll speak to those a little bit later. So before I introduce the other folks on my team that are here, I will just kind of pivot a little bit to logistics. A few questions came up early on, and we sent out an email. We've also put some stuff up online on Engage CWCB that you're free to reference for those that are looking in, that has a little bit of a FAQ. But here's some other things that we just wanted to kind of make clear if we hadn't. But task force members are appointed. We don't vote on task force membership, and you're really working with or reporting to the CWCB. So that end product that we create, our final deliverable, goes to the Colorado Water Conservation Board, and we will put that online and make that publicly available. And of course, any number of people, I suspect, will be looking at that, and could certainly be used to inform any number of issues, whether it's somebody's personal water conservation program, or somebody looking to advocate for water conservation or outdoor landscape changes in their community, all the way to locally elected officials or even above. So I am hopeful that, building on the water plan, right? The water plan is often we've said, and I've heard the governor say, a living, breathing document. And so we really want this to be, additive to that effort, as another step in the scaffolding that gets us closer to where we want to be, with some good thinking informed by this group of practitioners. So we're looking for general agreement of what's ripe. That we'll get into a little bit more detail with our facilitator, who I'll introduce here in a little bit. But those may not all be ideas that are ripe and ready right now. There could be things that we need more input on it. So if that's the case, I think it's fair that we're going to outline some of those things. Those could be things that come in for future water plan grants, or are just identified as something that need potential funding or exploration. There could also be existing best practices, or there could be things that are on the horizon that are coming out, that are in the works, that we want to point to. All of those are fair game. In fact, hopefully we can point to and have some congruence on things, rather than, certainly don't want to reinvent the wheel, but where there are new areas that, maybe haven't been said explicitly, I'm hoping that we'll get some traction there. We will, as CWCB, kind of funnel the great ideas that you have, and really take those ones that do rise to the top, those ones that seem right, and include those in the final report for consideration. And again, we'll post that online and make it publicly available. I think I speak to this a little bit later, but our kind of timeline for that is really trying to get something by January. So we've got some work to do, or the rest of this calendar year. We're not writing policy, we're not writing regulation, we're not a regulatory agency. Often what we do is show leadership by, really highlighting the directions that we need to go. But we can't tell the governor, we can't tell the legislature or other groups what to do, especially when we think about local control. That's not really our space, but what we do, and I think hopefully if if anything, what the water plan does well, and what I hope this group can emulate, is just shining a light on those most critical issues that really are the smart choices that we need to make under any future that are going to make us more resilient. We'll be sticking with the bounds of existing water law, probably goes without saying, but we can always think outside of the box. But as an agency, we are rooted in prior appropriation system. Will always kind of frame things up in that regard. So just putting that down as kind of a logistical piece or ground rule for us. CWCB will make these meetings, as I noted, publicly available. There are probably different ways that we can do that. We probably can't do it the same way every time. We do intend to have a few of these meetings in person if we can, and especially for some of our West Slope friends that are on here who had asked to have a remote option. That really had us thinking to make at least this first meeting fully virtual, and we may do that again. But we'd like to move the a couple of these meetings in person around the state if we can. And some of that's just going to simply come down to time availability, scheduling conflicts with all of us, not least of which me and our team, but and just our budget and where we can find a space. So we'll be working through that. But we will do our best to kind of just make this open so that people that are interested have an opportunity to engage. And again, you can look on Engage CWCB if you want, and even if you have a question, you could ask it there if you're just listening in. The other thing I wanted to note is, in light of that too, if there are chances to have more engagement with other folks that just wanted to be involved in the discussion and want to talk one-on or in person, we'll look for those opportunities. Certainly we have one at least on the horizon right now. So at the Drought Summit, many of you on the task force have indicated you can attend, and on day one on May 31st, we will be doing a breakout session that our facilitator will help host and you will help host, that I hope will have a little bit of a workshop vibe where we can kind of exchange some free flow of ideas and see what others are thinking as well. So we'll keep looking for those opportunities where they present themselves. And last but not least, I've talked about our website. You can always email me, obviously. But if there are any media questions, our contact person, we have a great a new person working in communications on our team, Katie Weeman, and that's her email address down there at the bottom. So feel free to email catherine.weeman@state.co.us should you have any questions. I'll note that it's not uncommon when we've had task forces like this that you may get approached by the media on your own. You feel free to refer folks to us if you do want to answer on your own. That's your prerogative. We would just ask that you're speaking on behalf of yourself and not the full task force, and you just make that clear. So schedule, as noted, I guess I did a little bit of a spoiler alert there, but we got a lot to do by January. So our goal is to have 4 to 6 meetings through that time, figuring that each of those will be about 2 to 4 hours, depending on the topic or bucket of topics, or what might need more thorough conversation and might warrant breakout discussion, and what maybe seems like a lower left topic. And we'll try to see if we can balance that out so that these are enjoyable and not overly lengthy. Again, we have that next best opportunity for engagement with the public and for this group to get back together. For those of you that can attend at the Drought Summit, I will just flag that, especially for those listening in, we are fortunate. I cannot believe and just really grateful for the interest in this. So we already have 175 people plus registered. So we're actually on a wait list right now. If you are a task force member who did not register and would like to be on, we will do our best to make space. Just email Kat or I afterwards, and we can make sure that you're on that list, because we want you to be a part of that session. And the more the merrier. We've got the space in that room for that. Our biggest challenge is just fire code limitations. Obviously, we can't go above, and then food. So we're gonna just make sure that we have everything locked in place. But we will probably have about 200, if not a little bit higher, people there. And that will be at History Colorado in Denver, again, May 31st, that first day, June 1st, second day. So we want to make the most of the time, and so I'll just go ahead and dive into it. And I wanted to take just a moment to let each of my staff that are on this say a few words, just say hello. And so I'll turn it over first to my Deputy Section Chief, Kat Weissmiller.
Hi, everyone. I've met most of you through the one-on-ones, but I'm Kat Weissmiller. I'm the Deputy Section Chief, and I'm excited to work with you all going forward. I'll turn it over to Sam next.
Awesome. Thanks, Kat. Yeah, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Sam Stein. I think I've met a lot of you here, though. I work as a water conservation and drought specialist in the water supply planning section, so really excited to be on this with you all. And turn it over to Jenna.
Hello, all. My name is Jenna Batson, and if you don't know me, that is okay because I started this week with CWCB as the Outdoor Water Conservation Coordinator, and I'm super excited to get to know all of you and help support in any way I can.
Awesome. Thanks, team. And again, I'd noted Vivian and Anna, and there are probably others on our team who have, been supporting just conceptually behind the scenes. And so, we have a great host of people that are always helping us with these efforts. And you all know many of them, like Kevin Reedy and others on our team. So just thanks. Everything we do at CWCB always feels like it's a big team effort, certainly in our section. And then last but not least by a long stretch is our fearless leader, Marjo Kurgis. And so I'm going to turn things over to Marjo now, and just want to say huge thanks. Marjo has a extreme bench depth of experience on not just facilitation, but specifically the topics that we're talking about. And she helps lead the Growing Water Smart initiative and facilitate those discussions, and just has been really a rock for us already in proving her value and helping us stay organized. And so Marjo, without further ado, I will turn it to you.
Hi, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here. I know quite a few of you, so nice to see you again virtually. And for those of you I don't know, personally, I recognize many of your names from being in this land use and water work area. So it's a real honor. Will you advance slides for me, Russ? Great. In any collaborative, I have no doubts that this group will approach this work with the utmost of respect for each other and your knowledge, but it's always good just to lay it down and have a set of agreement around how we want to work together and hold each other accountable for creating that atmosphere that we all want to work in. So I have a very long version of this, which we will share with all of you, but I want to run through these just to see if there's any additional ground rules in which you all would like to operate in. And so ultimately, it always starts with legitimacy and respect. And, within the context of that, what does that actually really mean? And I hope for within working in this atmosphere, it's that we, will not take any personal attacks, kind of a given, but we really don't question any motivation for being here, and that all of our intentions for participating are in the best interest of the state of Colorado, and that we'll respect each other's differences in terms of our values, and really focus on the disagreements we will have, because ultimately we might have disagreements around where the priorities and investments ought to be made. But we address those as problems to be solved. We're all working towards that same end goal. We might just have different pathways in which we think we need to get there. And so really looking at this as problem solving. Through the experiences of Growing Water Smart, I can say that there are a lot of people out there trying to figure this out. And I think the brain trust that has been convened here to really help identify some of these opportunity areas will be incredibly beneficial and supportive of even the work that I do. So I'm grateful. Active listening and involvement. We know that you have incredibly busy schedules, particularly online. It's very easy to multitask. And so we ask that everyone make that commitment to really be present in these discussions and dialogues and do their best to participate. We do understand in sort of the commitment you're making that you might not be able to attend every meeting. And so if there is the need to designate an alternative for you and sort of to kind of keep the continuity of the knowledge of the work that you've been doing through your institutions, we ask that you identify who that person might be and let us know in advance of each meeting so we know who to expect in terms of attendance. Creativity is sort of going to be the hallmark, I think, of this entire process, and really trying to think both within the confines of the parameters we have to work in, sort of the sideboards we have to work within, but also sort of creativity and addressing the scale and scope of the problems that we're facing that Russ really laid out. And lastly, we'll try to do our best in terms of transparency to really ensure that information that is being shared with all of you, so that that knowledge and information and the questions that are being asked are part of the process as a whole. It's very easy to kind of send everything to Russ, but that doesn't really help the group as a whole really engage in some of the difficult questions that we're all grappling with. Rumors, if there are any, we're trying to kind of lay out clarity around what this process is about. But if you do hear any rumors, to just agree to first bring them into this room for clarification before, going out to your social media page and making a broadcast announcement. That will sort of all kind of within that intent work together to address. So I don't know if anyone else has any favorite ground rules for processes that they would like to include. But if you wouldn't just mind kind of giving a thumbs up in the chat or with your emoticons that we're good in terms of the ground rules, I'll move us into a decision making. All right, and that thumbs up is going to be one of the ones we do next. And you can advance to the next slide. Thanks. So one of the interesting parts of any collaborative process is how do we come to agreement around the proposals that we want to make? And so we're working within a solution space where we're trying to create some buckets to work in a limited amount of time and get as far as we can in advancing our thinking. The difference between sort of a consensus process and a voting process, they're both decision making. Consensus is not everyone is in 100% agreement on everything. It is great in consensus when everyone gets there, but sometimes consensus is more about, I feel like I've been heard. And you can advance to the next slide, please. So we'll be working through consensus by meaning we've done some deep listening and we've gone as far as we can in trying to understand each other's perspectives, and that we've come up with as many agreements as we can. And that might be everyone agrees, or it might be that some of us have some reservations, but we will capture what those reservations are or what those other alternative perspectives are. So consensus for us will mean, I believe others understand my point of view, like I've advocated and banged the table enough. I believe I understand the views of others, and I've done some deep listening to really understand where they're coming from and what their perspective is and why it's important to them. And that whether or not it's the preference that I have as a group, I feel that we've gone as far as we can and we've fairly arrived at a solution. We're time bound. We can't solve all of the problems, but that's sort of the consensus we're going to work in. When we have a point where we're reviewing all of the different recommendations or proposals or solutions, whatever we end up kind of coming up with as a term for our outcomes, which will likely be closer towards the ends of the process, the way that we will come to consensus, and you can use these in breakouts, is using a thumbs up, which is 100%, I'm all in, I endorse this. A thumbs sideways, which is basically I like it, but I've been heard, and so we've got as far as we can, and so it's kind of I'm here. I don't necessarily agree with it. I want my thumbs down is I don't want to stop the process. I would like to have my perspectives noted as part of the formal report, but I feel like we've gotten here fairly. And the last one is if there is truly something that you cannot live with, that gets the thumbs down. Sorry, I screwed that up. It's like this. So thumbs down would be a veto. And in the case of a veto, we would simply record it in this process as we did not reach any agreement. So that is the only one out of all 4 of these that is no agreement. The other 3, I like it. Basically, I like it. And I just want to have my disagreement noted or all consensus. So the final report will reflect all of that, whatever format it sort of takes. We're not even sure what the buckets are. We're still kind of conceiving the process, but essentially what the report will record is around any statement or principle or proposal or recommendation, whatever that terminology we all agree on, that it would report back both the agreement areas as well as the areas where we did not come to agreement. So within this process, what we're looking for is what is sort of rising to the top of the greatest amount of consensus, and where are sort of the areas where there are concerns. So all of that will be captured in what we ultimately pull into a report. Okay, next slide. All right, that's we're going to pivot from us talking at you and really open this up in an opportunity for you to kind of share some thoughts. So Russ, in the opening, had said a couple of things that I think really tie into us wanting to do a round robin of the room. This notion of what does the landscape look like in the future? You know, what are the landscapes we need today for resiliency tomorrow? What is advancing Colorado scaping? I was recently in Arizona and they were grappling with a question like this as well. And so I want us to do, how would we do this? So we like have this, I should have done this off of we're going to try to go down the list of your names. Actually, we'll do it this way. I know how we can do this without the names moving. When you are done introducing yourself, you're going to call on somebody else. I will keep track so that we don't miss anybody, but you will call on. So we're going to popcorn. And we'll turn this screen off so that we can all see each other. But I just want you to write it down if you need the question, or Sam, if you could pop these questions in the chat. We're going to do a round of introductions. We want you to tell you who you are. I know you introduced yourself, but a little bit more about like what your expertise is that you're really bringing to this room. Describe what you think the future landscapes of Colorado need to look like. Like when we talk about transforming them, what does that actually potentially mean? What is it? What do you conjure up in terms of what that looks like and what we need to do? And then what are the values we're actually trying to incorporate into those landscapes? There's a lot that came out of the interviews that sort of echoed what those potential values might be. So we're going to take some notes while you do this. And Russ, do you actually want to participate too? Should we include CWCB staff in this?
Sure, we can. Let's see how fast we go. Let's get through our participants first.
All right, we'll get through all of the participants and then you guys can call on them if if we still have some time left. So with that, is everyone got the instructions right? You know what you're doing? We can turn the presentation off for a moment. Stop sharing. Great. All right. Waverly, you popped up as the first person in my list, so I'm going to call on you first.
Okay, great. Wonderful to be here with all of you today. My name is Waverly Claw. I'm the director of the Growing Water Smart program for the Sonoran Institute. It's a program where we bring together local governments and water providers to talk about opportunities to develop our communities in such a way that is as water wise and water efficient as possible, given our current and future conditions. In answering these questions, I guess, what would I like Colorado's landscapes to look like moving forward? I think that we need to ensure that our urban landscapes meet both human and ecosystem needs. They are a part of our communities, but they are also kind of the fabric upon which our plant and animal life also rely on. I think we need our landscapes to be resilient and long lasting. I think it's important that the decisions that we make now can withstand future conditions and also future needs. And then I think the values that I would point to would be functionality. For a very long time, a primary concern has been kind of beauty and aesthetics, and we have to make sure that moving forward we're being as strategic as possible with our landscapes. We need to weave equity into our values around landscapes and ensuring that we are taking into consideration and balancing the ability of all people to enjoy our landscape and be equally served by some of the approaches that we're taking. And, you know, of course, our landscapes should still be beautiful. And I think there's no question that we can create landscapes that are functional, equitable, and also beautiful. And I'm going to pass it on to, I'll pass it on to Paige, who I just recently was introduced to via email.
Okay, hi. I'm Paige McFarland. I'm the water conservation specialist for Centennial Water and Sanitation District. I kind of oversee our rebate programs and our seasonal program and do a lot of public education and outreach. And also, if you're not familiar with Centennial Water, we are not associated with the city of Centennial. We're Highlands Ranch, Solstice, and some areas of unincorporated northern Douglas County. So for me, I just like to see landscapes that are appropriate for the space we're in, native where it's appropriate, and also in our urban environments. I'd like to see diversity, flowering perennials around our homes and pollinator pathways, and like as little mulch as possible. And that's kind of me. I will pass it on to Rick.
Thank you, Paige. Yeah, Rick Schultz, Town of Castle Rock and Castle Rock Water. I'm the water efficiency supervisor for the town, and I run the efficiency and conservation program. That includes everything from plan review, new development, inspections of new installations, and then overseeing maintenance, rebate programs, incentive programs, and training for both homeowners and HOAs and contractors. So it's a fairly all-inclusive program. So it's a lot of fun. I've been there now coming up, well, actually I just passed 16 years. That's hard to believe. So 16 years. What do I think the landscape should look like? I think similar to what Paige said, you know, I look around not only the faces here, but, you know, all of the places where I have visited around the state. And one of the reasons that we love living where we live is because they're all different. And, you know, I don't want everything to look all the same. I don't think it would work, even if we wanted that. It wouldn't work anyway. But, you know, we've got such a huge range of climates, you know, as you move around from mountains to plains and urban to rural and so on and so forth. So I think it just has to be regionally or locally specific and appropriate. And then as I contemplated the value that I was immediately drawn to was personal responsibility. And the reason I'm drawn to that is because I think without people taking ownership and without people taking some stake in what we're doing here and without people, you know, taking some level of personal responsibility, it's not going to work. So I think in order for this to be successful, it has to be, people have to buy into it and take some level of responsibility. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Tim York.
I knew that was coming. Thanks, Rick.
You're welcome.
Hi, everybody. I think I know quite a few of you. Good to see some familiar faces. My name is Tim York. I'm the manager of water conservation for Aurora Water. We have a fairly extensive water conservation program that covers everything from incentive programs, assessments. We're also involved, I'm personally involved with the development review process and codes and ordinances. My background, I am a registered landscape architect in the state of Colorado. And spent my private sector career designing and building landscapes across southern Nevada and Texas. So a little bit of a landscape background. I'm going to echo what some others have said, which I think is probably going to continue happening as we get through people. But from what these landscapes should look like, I really like what Rick said. You know, it should look like it belongs in the space. It does need to be regionally appropriate or locally appropriate, as Rick said as well, for our areas, but recognizing where we live and what those native or normal, I guess, landscapes are before we build the built environment, some sort of mesh between that. So it doesn't look like we took a unbuilt environment and made it a built environment. And now the landscapes just become something that they shouldn't be. Values, there's been some great things said. I'm really interested in having the equitability part be part of our discussions. Diversity is also really important. I think my favorite one so far was functional. So how do we create functional spaces that meet the needs of our residents? So that's really important to me. And I will pass it on to Jared Biggs.
Thank you, Tim. So my name is Jared Biggs. I am the Assistant Finance Director for the City of Durango. But previous to this role, I was the Assistant Utilities Director here for 5 years, and I get to keep a foot in both of those boats graciously from some of my other colleagues. So in that role, you know, we were domestic water supplier for the City of Durango, wastewater treatment for the City of Durango, and you know, I've come to know and love a lot of the efforts and challenges of kind of smaller rural communities and that think themselves very conservation minded and maybe don't do everything they think they're doing, so to speak. So it's kind of a fun exercise. But with that said, you know, on the second point, I think it is a lot of ditto, right? How do we make a Durango scape that fits Durango? And you know, we sit in pinyon and juniper, but we plant bluegrass, right? And how do we make that appealing in a way that fits very well? Similarly, it would stick out like a sore thumb, you know, on the Front Range where there are natural grasslands, right? So fit regionally, locally, that kind of was pretty resounding that Rick mentioned that. So I think that is key to making it appealing for everybody. You know, and when I think of what values I would like to see incorporated, it's almost like an efficiency ethos, right? That being efficient is inherently good, which I believe, right? And I think sometimes is a challenge. Because it's there is sometimes the rationale to use. And instead having a little bit more of a, you know, I can leave some there for somebody else. In our case, it's our neighbors in New Mexico, right? But having that efficiency ethos is what I'd like to see integrated somehow as a value. And I will punt to Andrea from Ute Water.
Hello, I'm Andrea Lopez. I am the External Affairs Manager here at Ute Water. So I'm responsible for public relations, education outreach, some of the work in water conservation, but a lot of education and information provided to our customers about what's going on in the district and opportunities that they can take advantage of. We are solely a domestic water provider, so our board is very firm on the idea that we were founded for domestic water services and we only provide domestic water services. And that is a mission and a mentality that we can embrace here on the Western Slope because we are fortunate enough to operate off of a dual water system. So since we're the largest domestic water provider here, about 95% of our customers actually receive their water that they use for outdoor watering or irrigation through a separate provider, through a separate system for an irrigation provider. So we have our engineering department that also looks at plans for development and approval, but instead of looking for conservation techniques, they're looking for, are they getting water to use outdoors from an irrigation provider and not relying on us as water as domestic water providers to provide them with that water. So we certainly have a very complex system over here that when people move here or migrate over to the Western Slope, it takes a little bit of acclimation. And it's also very difficult from a conservation standpoint to talk about conserving water that we don't have much control over. So that is certainly a challenge that we're always trying to push uphill with our customers and certainly communicate that we absolutely support water conservation. But it's very difficult when they're very familiar with us as their domestic water providers, but the issues or the actions that they can take for conserving water outdoors is with a completely separate water provider that they might not have a lot of interaction with due to paying it through their HOA or once a year. They're just not as familiar with that agency as they are with us. I would say that the future of our landscape, I would also agree that I would love to see it be specific for the regions within Colorado, but also more specifically, I think we can all agree that within our communities, there's probably smaller areas that we could be a little bit differentiated. I know here there's like the deserty area in like the Redlands area compared to like more of like a river town, like a Palisade. So I think even within our region-wide communities, like our smaller communities and even neighborhoods in between could certainly embrace different native and drought-friendly landscapes specific to where they're located within our community. I think one of the values that we should try to incorporate, obviously this whole thing is a behavioral change, right? And that's probably one of the most difficult things to measure and to do quickly. And it's certainly going to take all of our communities pulling together in the same direction to implement, but definitely a behavioral change, kind of going back to that personal responsibility. How are we going to get everybody on board to raise their hand and to be part of this solution? Because it's going to be a big change, especially here on the Western Slope. It's going to be uncomfortable and different, and it's going to look different. And how do we keep it Colorado and not Arizona or New Mexico or California? I'm going to pass it to Laura.
Great, thank you. Hi, I'm Laura Belanger with Western Resource Advocates. I think I know most of the folks on this call. I'm a senior water resources engineer and policy advisor with Western Resource Advocates. We're a nonprofit organization, and we do focus largely on policy. And we work a lot with municipalities and the state to advance both municipal efficiency as well as reuse, increasing opportunities for those. And then I did want to note that, you know, personally, I think this is relevant. I've done several retrofits on residential properties, and thank you, Kate, for my garden in a boxes, including the irrigation system, and I maintain them. And I say that because it's super relevant, and I'm always struggling with like weeds. And I think Paige, you said minimize mulch. Like I must spend hundreds of dollars a year on mulch. And so I do just want to throw that out there because I've got my own experience with that. And then regarding the other questions, you know, I'd like to start with, you know, cool season turf is obviously not bad, but we are very interested in seeing it lose its go-to status. And start really setting some of these enabling conditions in place that we need in order to do that successfully. And that's going to take time. And then, yeah, shifting the focus more to beneficial, regionally appropriate plants and grasses. And then I do think with this switch, like looking to the future, I think this is just a tremendous opportunity to help use our landscaping and use this shift that's going to happen over time to really help instill a conservation ethic around the state. As people start to ask questions about what's going on, why did you do that, and start to see the benefits of it. And so, I'm really excited to be involved. See the tremendous expertise on this call. And so wanted to just thank the CWCB for convening this group. And with that, I will punt it to Kate, who I have lined up.
Thanks, Will, and thanks for the the call out of your garden in a box. Glad to hear it's thriving. So I'm Kate Larson. I'm the program director for water and energy programs with Resource Central. We are a 40-plus-year-old nonprofit organization that has a mission of putting conservation into action. So everything we do is very focused on boots on the ground, one person at a time, one HOA at a time, helping them to reduce their dependence on non-renewable resources. So specifically in our water conservation programs, we work with 47 water providers in Colorado to help them implement their water conservation programs, and including many on this call. And some of the programs that you may have heard of, Garden in a Box is probably our kind of largest and most popular. We also have a sprinkler inspection program that's pretty large called Slow the Flow. And then we are in, I think it's our third year of our lawn replacement program, which this year will probably end up working with about 1,000-ish homeowners, helping them to tackle water conservation retrofit projects, taking out grass and putting in low water plants. Let's see here. So I think that in terms of what I would like Colorado landscapes to look like in the future, to me, I think that, having them be vibrant and abundant. We are really lucky that we have an amazing plant palette that we can put in. And I think that we're not talking about rocks and cactus, and we're so lucky with, our native plants and adaptable plants. And there's just so much opportunity for beautiful, but also really abundant landscapes. And that's something that I think that, sometimes when people are thinking about this, they forget. And really not operating from a place of scarcity, but of a place of abundance. And then, I think many people have mentioned this, but really landscapes that serve the needs of residents and businesses and communities. And then I'll, make my always plug for lots and lots of trees and opportunities, for both native and non-native pollinators to thrive. And that really means that we have to have a lot of biodiversity. In terms of the values, I think that, a lot of people have mentioned sort of personal responsibility, and I'll piggyback on that a little bit. And that really, anything we do has to come from a place of empowerment. And, there's not going to be a one size fits all. That, we're lucky, and Colorado is and celebrating, the diversity of Colorado residents and Colorado types of landscapes. And there's really not going to be a one size fits all. So we're really providing knowledge and tools and resources that help people take action. And also that we're looking to accommodate, all types of communities. And all residents aren't going to be looking for the same thing, and all businesses aren't going to be looking for the same thing. So really making sure that we're not sort of focusing on one size fits all solutions. I also, really will make the case for measurable change. If we're out there making a ton of changes, and people are, going through landscape transformations, but we're not saving water, why are we doing that? And so making sure that we're really able to show and point to measurable change is a value, I think, of this. And then the last thing I'll say is, this is not punitive. Like, this is an opportunity for us to have more resilient, biodiverse, and thriving landscapes that people love. Through my experience with our programs, people like fall in love with their landscapes after doing these retrofits or changes. And so I really think that celebrating that and keeping it lighthearted and fun is really important too. And I will call on Frank.
Thank you, Kate. Wow, it's just a pleasure to be on this team. I know many of you too, and as I hear everybody describe what they're thinking, it's inspiring, and also I think speaks to the magnitude of what we're all facing. My name is Frank Kinder. I'm the Water Efficiency and Sustainability Manager for Northern Water. We serve water to the northeast quadrant of the state. Our team oversees a variety of services that we support to the towns, cities, and districts. Those include consultations, irrigation audits, training, tools, and especially grants to kind of pilot the landscape transformation topics we're discussing here, and then learn from those pilots, and then ideally perfect those methods and expand them statewide. So we're having some fun with all of those different services, and we work with a number of you to help make them better. I think about the right ways to talk about these challenges, and many of us have had discussions around them, preferably over a refreshment of some sort. And I think we're all struggling with what these things should look like. And one of the metaphors I like to use is moving from the corded phone, which I think of as kind of the historical approach to landscapes with a turf dominant format, to more of a cell phone. And when we think about the values, you know, this is a cultural thing that we're all assessing here, and there's a lot of history with our higher water use, higher input, higher intensity landscapes. And so when we make a change like this that's cultural and significant, I think that we need to address the power and priority people place on their landscapes and the value that they receive from them in their personal spaces and also their communities. And I also think it's worth addressing here that many of us work in industries that transformed the West from what it was to something different. That was the intention of water development, right? I think we can't ignore that. You know, we made the desert bloom, or in this case, the grassland. And in some ways, we're stepping back away from that. And this is a bit of a third rail here, and I might get myself in trouble, but I think we're acknowledging that's the reality we're facing. So we're moving from where we've come to kind of something a little different. And I'm looking at Patrick here I'm curious what his take will be on that. So when I speak of the values, I think that the landscape should be alive, first and foremost. We like to live around living things, and I think that living landscapes give us the biggest amount of benefit. In other parts of the country, I think you can have different approach, but I think it's important. Living plants, trees, and grasses. The second thing is I think they should look intentional and designed to differentiate them from completely wild spaces and to meet urban landscape aesthetics. We all like to go play in the high country and the wilderness, and that's where we can enjoy that format. But I think urban spaces intentionally need to be different than that, because we tend to prefer that form in our cities. I think they should be diverse. I agree that we don't have to have the same set of designs everywhere. I think there should be a lot of choices. And I think they should reflect our sense of place. Much of what we've come to expect and utilize is imported from the European aesthetic. And here it's a different place. We love living here. And I think that we should be able to recognize some of the colors and shapes and textures, the plants, rocks, trees, and features that we love in the state. So they seem familiar. And they're also ours to own and to manage, speaking to Rick's point. So then when I think of what the values are, I think we have to go for the lowest common denominator to make them easy to use. A cell phone's easy to use, so you can't make it difficult. I think that grass is easy to take care of for most people. This should be easier than grass. It has to be a very low barrier to entry. I think they should be viable under increasingly diverse scenarios of climate change. So I think what that means is they should be able to, oh, here's my clock. Sorry, my clock is birds and it rings every hour, so apologies for that. But I think as water restrictions come on board, we need to have landscapes that will survive under restrictions, but yet thrive when there are no restrictions. So a little extra water makes these plants really take off and thrive, but we don't want landscape abandonment in the time of restriction. So I think we need to prepare for that eventuality. I got two more. I think they should be inviting to look at. People should want to be around these. They should be something that is an upgrade. So thinking aesthetics matter, and I think that they should be thoughtful and they should look like
hey, I want to own this. I want that new cell phone. I want that thing that provides me benefit. And lastly, I think we should market them as not a sacrifice, not a loss, but an enhancement. And that's the marketing that's so important to this. We're all struggling with how to do that, but if this is something people want to gravitate toward, I think that we'll help get there. So I'll turn it over to Mr. McMeekin from Hartford Homes.
Thank you, Frank. I only know Frank on this panel. Waverly and I have met briefly, but my name is Pat McMeekin. I'm the president of land for Hartford Homes. We are a local builder developer in the Northern Colorado market. We're currently building in the communities of Fort Collins, Wellington, Timnath, Greeley, Windsor, Johnstown. So we have a pretty wide swath across the northeastern part of the state. We've been building and developing up here for 30 years and under second generation leadership. In my role as president of land, I oversee all of our entitlements, acquisitions. So when we're acquiring new projects, when we're seeking project approvals, I largely work with probably many of your counterparts at our cities up here. And then through infrastructure development, which is developments of roads, streets, water, sewer, non-potable irrigation systems, landscapes for large master plans. The communities that we work on range in scale from a 150 unit infill condo project on 20 acres to a 2,200 unit master plan, 600 acres. So we really kind of span the gamut. We are very concerned about affordable housing in the state, very concerned. And one of the big drivers that we see as limiting projects to market or making projects extraordinarily expensive is water, as everybody knows. So we are keenly aware of trying to reduce our water use in our communities to the extent we can to continue to meet the housing needs of the state. So in addition to that, I also oversee our water rights portfolio. So we are an active buyer of water rights. We own a number of water rights right now and continue to do that. So I oversee that part of our business as well. So I'm excited to be part of this committee. We often don't get to be involved in these conversations, so I look forward to having discussions with everybody. When I think of Colorado lands of the future, I went to buzzwords right away, and they're so a lot of them have already been said, but sustainable is something that comes to mind. Thoughtful is another buzzword that comes to mind. We need to tie our landscapes to what the area can support. And then the other word I jotted down was interactive. When people move into our communities, they interact with our landscapes through the trail networks, through the parks, through the bike paths in the project. And I think that as we make them inviting spaces, people will start to understand that this is not something to be scared of and something that we should start to embrace. And so, I look at how do we create interaction with these landscaped areas. So values, again, I'm buzzwords. The first value that came to mind was achievable. I think I've heard that from a number of folks, is we have to come up with something that is achievable because we have to move the needle. I don't think we have a choice. Replicatable, something that can be replicated in my mind is something that can be expanded easily and have an increased impact. And then the last one was education. We see a number of folks who have moved to Colorado from areas who don't have the same water challenges we do and don't understand why we wouldn't have our large common areas in turf. And we spend a large amount of time educating people about that. And I think that's something that is an important value we should strive for with this. So again, thank you for having me, and I will pass it on to Mariel.
Thanks, Patrick. I'm Mariel Miller. I'm the Water Conservation Manager for Fort Collins Utilities, and I work with a team that provides all sorts of programs and services for all types of customers, both indoor and outdoor water use. I know a little bit about a lot of things. I've worked in water conservation very specifically and more focused for almost 6 years now. But prior to that, I've worked in city planning and sustainability and at a higher level in public works. And so I understand and have a lot of experience in many different areas within local government. Let's see, as far as the values I'd like to see incorporated, you know, it's hard to not just say ditto to so many great things that I'm hearing, but I'll try and focus on some of the things I really want to emphasize. I think having form match function is something that I really value, and I'm not, you know, anti Kentucky bluegrass, but I think there's a place for it. And it's not everywhere, right? I am also not a diehard native plant person. I think having flexibility in the, you know, plant palette makes a lot of sense for people. But I do see opportunities to promote more natives for the biodiversity support that they provide. You know, having landscapes that can withstand drought or other water shortages, I think is really key for, you know, supporting the look and feel of a place and the economy that supports that place. A lot of that has to do with aesthetics and making sure that, you know, our trees are healthy and living and provide shade and beauty for the community, as well as the other areas that are landscaped. Sorry, that's my answer to the Colorado landscape, what that looks like. As far as my values, I think I'd like to see, you know, a planning approach and being proactive incorporated into the work that's done. I think a lot of these things take a long time to see results and to see success, and you know, spending the time to plan and implement is really important, and being proactive with that instead of reactionary. The value of not only maybe landscape transformation, but along with that, the work that comes afterward that really sustains those landscapes, the operation and maintenance piece. I see a lot of value in education paired with kind of codes and ordinances or standards, whatever you want to call them, or whatever, you know, tool that might look like depending on where you are and what you're doing in your work, but also considering opportunities for flexibility within that. So, you know, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and not every landscape, you know, looks attractive to one person versus another. And so being able to allow for some flexibility there, I think, is really important. And then lastly, you know, piloting things and being able to try things out and not being afraid of being in that, you know, maybe short-term space of experimentation. That I will turn it over to Greg Fisher.
Thanks, Marielle. Hi, everybody. I think I know most of you. I'm Greg Fisher with Denver Water. I just want to say thanks for being selected for this. This is really a great group, and I'm excited to work with everybody here on a topic that we seem to all have a tremendous amount of passion for. So I head up our conservation and customer side planning group for Denver Water. Have been here more years than I'd like to count, but still bring a lot of excitement every day to this topic in particular. It's hard to go in the middle. I'm glad I'm not going at the end, because I think everything will have been said by then. But a few things I think about, just to reiterate what other people have said, is I do think function is really important as we think about our landscapes, being really intentional about how we're going to use them. Marielle, I think you said it, that there is a place for grass. I think there's a limited use for grass, but then really being intentional about the other spaces we design and use. I think about I'm having a hard time putting this into words, but when I think about Colorado, I think Colorado, we all know that it's a special place. And a couple of things I've learned about it is that we really value the natural environment. So I think our landscape should represent that. I also think, and I learned this from some of the customer surveys we did, that Coloradans, more than I think many other states, has kind of this we ethic. And so the landscapes we select really should not just be for ourselves, but for the entire environment, our communities, in the whole state. So however we can sort of give our landscapes that Colorado soul, I think will be great. And in a way, sort of branding that as we go and have people, especially the newcomers, come to understand that there is something different about Colorado and how we approach landscapes and water. Which brings me to values. And one thing I really think we can do with these landscapes is show a deep respect for water in our landscapes. And the more intentional we are about making our landscapes functional, I think we can do that and sort of give back to the environment. Other people have mentioned equity. I very much agree with that. You know, in our growing urban environments, I think we want to make sure that that is equitable. I think environmental justice is going to be a big topic for us as we go through this. So, you know, there are times, and you'll hear me say this a few different times, but we may be planting new landscapes where we're not removing turf. So we may be, at times, we may not be saving a lot of water, but it's still really important to put in the right landscapes for different communities. But I don't think that goes against what this group is trying to do or the mission that you shared with us in the beginning, Russ. So I'll stop there, just say thanks and excited to work more with everybody. And then I'll pass it on to Sensory.
I was wondering who was going to try to say my name. So thanks, Greg. I'm Sensory Eads. I'm the Assistant Director of Urban Ecology and Trails for Denver Parks in our Planning, Design, and Construction group. I oversee the urban ecology team that focuses on restoring our lakes and waterways. And then we also do policy, planning, design, and implementation for turf conversions or landscape transformations for Denver Parks. And then I also oversee a Green Corps team that provides workforce development to start learning some of these skills in landscape maintenance, especially as we are going to need to build more capacity on the maintenance side, as we are going to be transitioning from more turf to Colorado scapes. We need a workforce that can provide that maintenance. And then I also oversee our regional trail team. And I've been with Parks for 11 years, so it's exciting to see just this paradigm shift. And it's exciting to be a part of, and it's been a long time coming. So wish we were doing this 10 years ago, but as far as, you know, how we see these landscapes transforming over time, I mean, I do believe they should be native-ish, but obviously, you know, we need to broaden that to more climate adapted species, to what is going to be thriving here in the next 20 to 30 years, especially as we try to incorporate trees into some of these landscapes. And they really need to be, you know, supporting a healthy ecosystem, not only for the environment, but also for the communities they're serving and providing that access to nature. And again, I think I'm echoing a lot of what everyone has said. I think equity is a huge value that I see as part of this conversation. I know it's really been a difficult one that we've been having at Denver Parks, as far as we need to balance where we're potentially taking away active recreation and ensuring that we're not in communities that maybe already have a lot of native landscapes, versus kind of undoing a little bit of the City Beautiful movement design in some of our more affluent communities and providing more balanced landscapes at, say, Cheeseman Park. And so I know that's been kind of a difficult conversation that we're trying to craft the message around of how do we balance this work and ensure that we're not taking away some of the other benefits that some of these spaces need to provide, including recreation. And this is obviously from a parks perspective. So I know this will be much broader than just parks, but so yeah, without echoing too much more of what everyone already said, I will turn it over to Bao Changtua.
It's a pleasure to be amongst these folks. It's been very inspiring just hearing all of you. And so I'm so glad that I didn't get to go first, because I think my task is a lot easier, because I will say ditto to a lot of what you said. I am the Development Services Director with the Mile High Flood District. You know, we are a regional stormwater flood district, but you know, really 5 years ago, made the intention of really working with our private sector friends, our developer friends like Patrick, recognizing that they do so much in shaping the land and we need to be a partner with them to build off of each other's strengths. And so I oversee not only development review, but we actually operate as a designer and a constructor for a lot of the developers and actually putting in the stream improvements associated with development projects. And so I think from a land, you know, what we'd like to see in the landscape, I kind of ditto what everyone has said. So I'm not going to do a lot of repeating, but I think a few of what you said that really kind of resonated with me is really, you know, unfortunately, we are somewhat in an urban environment where we've got both people and we've got the ecosystems. And so I think trying to balance both of those, I think Waverly, you kind of said it first, of balancing both human and ecosystem needs. I think it's important. That also ensures that it's going to be sustainable and relevant, because it's not just about one or the other, but it's balancing both. I love hearing the terms about being appropriate. So we agree with you there. We've got a term that we've coined at the Flood District of always seeking that highest function and lowest maintenance version of whatever we're doing, putting that in the ground. From a value standpoint, just going to add more terminologies to whatever's been littered in this virtual space. I think early regional planning, and when I say early regional planning, it's not just about a city or a county or a water provider, but it's all of us. As early as we can get will inform all of us as we are planning and designing projects. Another word to throw out there is systems thinking. We all are very connected. And so whatever we do, there is a domino effect of us, either upstream or downstream, and keeping that in mind. So bring more people to the table. The other word I'd love to toss out there is partnerships, because it's going to take a village to make things happen. It needs to be us versus them. So developing that us mentality. And then the other one that's a little bit more technical is fail safe. These things do take a long time to come to life, and we can't be afraid of making mistakes. So we have to prepare to design things to fail safe versus testing things until they are proof of concept before we do it. So just want to toss that out there. Again, a pleasure to be part of this think tank.
And will you just pick someone from the list that hasn't gone yet?
Yeah, how about Amy Moyer? Has Amy gone?
No, thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Moyer. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships for the Colorado River District, and I've been there about 2 years, based in Glenwood Springs. So at the River District, we represent 15 counties on Colorado's western slope. And before that, I came from Denver and actually worked at the Department of Natural Resources for about 8 years. But with my role at the Colorado River District, I've primarily been getting a new funding program off the ground. We call it our Community Funding Partnership, that was made possible after the passage of a local ballot question in November of 2020. And through that funding program, we have a category focused on conservation and efficiency. And I've really looked for projects aimed at making landscape changes on the West Slope. So it's really nice to be a part of this group and add some of that lens. Thinking through values, I think for those that know me on the task force know that I'm in the phase of my life as a parent of a young child, and I actually have another young child on the way. So that's at the forefront of my mind of really thinking about, the future generations that are going to live here in Colorado, and really wanting to show those future residents of Colorado that there is a group that really had the foresight to think about how can we have landscapes that are beautiful and support our community values, but have been thought out really intelligently about the climate that we live in. And I think there's a way to do that. And then thinking about just values that I'd like to see. I mean, it's such an all-star cast in this group, and it's actually kind of nice to go at the end to hear the perspectives of everyone, but really leaning into that statewide perspective and this value and theme of that we really are all connected by the way that we use and move water across this state. And then I think there's a way to really acknowledge the autonomy of our communities and acknowledge the different geographies while looking at and acknowledging that community decisions really impact one another across the state. And it's nice to go after you, Greg, just really thinking about that we ethic. I think there's a way that can be a value that's intertwined in this task force. And there you go. The Colorado River District can agree with Denver Water right off the bat. So we're off to a good start. So I will close there and turn it over to Tori.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Amy. Colorado River compatriot. I was thinking about that and I was like, oh, we could have a t-shirt. So I am Tori Jarvis. I work for the law firm Sullivan Green Seavey, and primarily am here because I represent the Northwest Colorado Council of Governments Water Quality Quantity Committee. So the upstream part of the Colorado River District's region. So Grand, Summit, Pitkin, Eagle, Gunnison, parts of Routt County. So we often call ourselves the headwaters area. I think on this task force, it was like rural resort communities, which I will try to not say again because it's really hard for me to say. And the land use bill right now has rural resort communities. Anyway, that's the area. And this group of elected officials have been working together since the 70s on linking land use and water planning. This group didn't come at it from a water conservation perspective, which is how I think we most often use that linking land use and water whip now when we hear it. But this group in the 70s was really worried about water quality, especially because they have really reduced stream flows in the headwaters for a number of reasons. And so they were realizing that as ski resorts grow and the region grew, they were impacting their water quality. And so that's the first way that this group started looking at linking land use and water planning. And I think it's not slower to come to the table, but it's still trying to figure out what it means in the headwaters to work on water conservation and efficiency in a way that's appropriate for those folks. So I helped update a set of model water quality protection standards for that group maybe 5 years ago. And then Marjo helped us with the water plan grant, also draft a pretty freewheeling, it turned out to be a huge project, set of recommendations for what kind of water conservation and efficiency measures make sense specifically in the headwaters region. And then for other clients at that law firm, I do work on drafting other sorts of local regulations. Most of my expertise is focused on water and environmental regs, but affordable housing and lots of other issues that we've talked about today as well. So I think that may come into play in this group. I'm also work from home in Montrose, which is outside of the Northwest COG region, but I've lived on the West Slope for over 15 years now, I think. All right, so I feel like everybody covered really well landscapes, what kind of landscapes they want to see. So I'll try to be really quick, but I think like everyone can imagine that for the headwaters region, that climate appropriate is that whole group would be very sensitive to that. But it's really nice to hear that it seems like everyone in this group is really sensitive to that. So I think that's great. Personally, when I think about what I imagine as a Colorado scape, it's really beautiful, whether it's deserty. So somebody said cactus earlier is a bad thing, but I love cactus. And I think that would be beautiful, or it could be beautiful in Montrose. And then, you know, the wildflower Landscaping more in the headwaters region is gorgeous, and they have a lot of personality. And I will just ditto in particular the importance of ecosystem functions, tying back to the water quality benefits of having the right kind of landscape for your region. And a couple of the values that I think pop up there, I'll hit on a couple that I don't know we've talked about as much, but I think one of them is just developing a value that this is business as usual. This isn't something, maybe it feels new now, but I think hopefully as our population demographics change, it also becomes business as usual, just the way that we do things. This is what our landscapes just look like. It's less of a question. And I think that local government regulations can help with that, because then you don't have as many choices, or your choices are more narrow when you build. And what was I going to say about the we ethic? I wrote that down, but I think it's like the idea of linking what we do when we conserve water, and that if there's a way to sell that there's broader benefits than just we need to save water so our community can continue to grow. There may be more compelling things that we could do with that water, or ways that we could demonstrate how we're making our state better in ways that I think the whole state cares about. So like environmental recreation benefits. And I know it seems like it's pretty challenging to try to describe those things, but if there's a way to kind of make that sell, I think that would be a helpful value. And then my last one I wanted to highlight that I think Sincere and some other people highlighted, but the leadership of publicly owned lands and governments and taking a lead is a value that I think will help spur everyone else. All right, that was enough for me. Let's see, so who is next? We're getting down there in the list. Catherine, I don't know you yet, so I'm excited to meet you.
Thank you, Tori. Nice to meet you. I'm Catherine Moravec. I work for Colorado Springs Utilities. My job title is Water Conservation Lead, but I work on a team of there's 7 of us that do water conservation for the Colorado Springs service territory. I've worked at Colorado Springs Utilities for 14 years. Prior to that, I worked in the landscape industry. I worked for CSU Extension for a while. I was a greenhouse manager. I did landscape installation, landscape maintenance. And so I'm a plant person that has bridged into the water profession, and they're both so fascinating. And I'm so glad to see this intersection of the 2 areas take center stage at this point in time. It's a dream come true. So thanks for inviting me. So yeah, I agree that everyone has had some amazing ideas. I think what I would like to see in Colorado landscapes, in addition to most of what everybody said, is I'd like to see our native grasses take a center stage. And I apologize for those of you that this is a repeat, but I just think that much of Colorado's natural ground cover is native grass, and I think we can use that to our benefits, considering we have 300 species of native grasses in the state. There should be one for every single situation that we can find. And I also hope that our trees are strategically placed and thoughtfully planted so that we can sustain them over a long period of time, because they are providing a lot of benefits to us. So I'm a huge fan of living landscapes. I'd love to see not only the plants change, but I would like to see a lot more efficient irrigation in terms of equipment and management. I think there's a huge opportunity in terms of making sure that we pay as much attention to the irrigation as we do to the plant cover. And that can be through regulation or all sorts of ways that we can get to the irrigation systems. And I do think irrigation is valuable. So I think we do need it to get the benefits we need from our landscapes. We do probably need to irrigate to some level in our Colorado landscapes, but we can do that a lot more efficiently. So that's what I'd like to see in practical terms. But in terms of values, one concern that I have is I want to make sure that if we put public money into transforming landscapes, that there's a public benefit, meaning that that benefit is transferred to all the people that contributed financially to paying for those programs. I'm concerned that if we pay a lot of money for transforming landscapes, that there might be few people that benefit with public money. So I want to make sure, just raise that issue. It's an equity concern. But beyond that, the two values that I would like to see in this type of effort would be, number one, we can be really innovative. I think there are some super innovative ideas out there right now, and I would love to see those come to the forefront because I think they offer real solutions. So if we can sort through all the innovative ideas out there, I think there's some really smart thinking that is emerging in Colorado. And then second, whatever solutions start to work, they need to be scalable. So we can't have really innovative ideas staying in pockets, which is, I think, to me, what we have today. We have to figure out how to scale these solutions to a much larger land area. So that's what I have to share right now. And I will pass it along to Lisa.
Woo. I'm starting to have one of those getting chosen for kickball team moments from junior high. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Lisa Darling. I'm with the South Metro Water Supply Authority. We're a group of 14 water providers in the South Metro Denver area, several of whom our members are on the call as well, including Castle Rock and Centennial. We were actually formed in 2004 for the very specific reason of collaboration and cooperation, not just on water supplies, but on things like efficiency and reuse. And I think we've been really successful. One of the things that we have done through the authority and with the assistance of our members is we have a conservation committee that is working on, for example, right now, updating our model landscape ordinance. We are also with Castle Rock, one of the sponsors of the QUEL program, which is the Qualified Water Efficient Landscaper program. I think that there's just a couple other organizations in the state, Eagle County, Aspen, that have the program, but it's been really successful. And I think that we've actually certified about over 200 landscape contractors. So we're really excited about that, as well as we've translated it into Spanish. So everyone's ideas are so fabulous, and I certainly don't want to be repetitive. I really thought a lot about what you said, because I think that there's a tendency for us to use words that people might often compare or relate to austerity, being very austere. And so I think I'd like to see Colorado landscapes that are rich. And obviously I don't mean that financially. I mean that like a rich gumbo roux, with dimension and depth, that there's just there's so many ways to be gorgeous. And so I think that that's what I'd like to explore. And in terms of values, it really goes along with that same sort of idea. We talk a lot about change. We talk a lot about, appropriateness and what looks right in one location. But I really would love to create a conversation where we're encouraging people to embrace what Colorado really is, encouraging folks to look forward to creating that beautiful depth and dimension, that richness of our state, which is why we all live here and we love it so much. So that's what I would like to see. And I will go ahead and I will hand it over to Drew. And Drew, last is just another place in line, but I know Austin's right behind you.
But
so.
I know, but I'm not last. Dang it. That's kind of wanted to be last if I had to wait this long. Sorry, Austin, you get the gold medal. Thank you all. Nice to be here. Lots of familiar faces. My name is Drew Beckwith. I work at the City of Westminster, and I run all of our, effectively our water conservation and efficiency programs. All of my outdoor programs are really just with Resource Central and Kate and all of the things that she talked about. I do have an income qualified indoor efficiency program that I run in partnership with Mile High Youth Corps and our local county housing authorities. So that's half my job. The other half of my job is I'm involved in the land development review process for all of our development in the city. So that's from the very early phases of an inkling of an idea that a developer wants to do all the way through our official development plan review process, and ultimately the charging of tap fees for all new development. So that's my world in Westminster. Like many have said before, maybe in Marjo's context, I haven't heard anything that I would like even like put a sideways thumb at. Certainly no fist, no thumbs down. I might have a different order for some of this stuff, but like really it's yes to what everyone else has said. So like in my own words, I want our landscapes of the future to have much less high water use turf grass. And I want them to be representative of where we live. I hope, I may be naive on this one, but I hope that is not an individual community by community sort of situation. I really do hope there's some commonality between like what Boulder and Fort Collins and Westminster and Loveland can do, because I worry about the level of effort to do an individualized landscape feeling for every single community in the state of Colorado. So I hope there's some regionalness that we could go for there. And the values that I want to see, I want our new landscapes to be water thrifty. I think it's abhorrent that 50% of the treated drinking water that Westminster makes goes outdoors to water plants. And that is common amongst all of the other Front Range utilities. It's disgusting, and we need to use less water outdoors. And I also want our landscapes on a value side to be enjoyable. And that may be like tipping a little bit of like my own personal values into it, because I think that a newer, all of the kinds of landscapes we've been talking about would be more enjoyable than a, monotonous green landscape. But I think I might be projecting myself into that. But as Kate said, right, the people that go through a landscape transformation, they love it. They're like pumped about their new jam, their new outdoor space. And maybe we might have some self-selection bias in that issue there, but that's my hope, that once people see what these new landscapes are, they are, as many other folks have said, this is a positive thing. This is good. It's better. It's, all things positive. So thanks. Austin, take us home.
All right. Thanks, Drew. All right. Do I get a special prize for being chosen last for the kickball team? No? Okay. Well, it's great to see some familiar faces and meet some new people, and thank you for having me on this committee. I'm Austin Troy from the University of Colorado, Denver, Department of Urban Regional Planning, where I've been a professor for about 10 years. I'm also an environmental consultant, which I've been doing for about 25 years. Yeah, I've been recently, it seems like practically every project I'm doing is related to water. Popular topic here, and something of great interest to me. I'll teach about water too, and as Waverly, I believe, has taken one of my classes. But yeah, recently I've been doing some work. I've been working with Laura and Drew and some others on turf replacement methodologies. It's an area I'm really interested in. Is about developing new GIS and remote sensing based methodologies for really targeting, micro-targeting turf replacement efforts, and coming up with new ways of looking for, selecting, querying, filtering landscapes for characteristics that we either want to preserve in terms of areas of turf we want to preserve, or areas that we think could potentially go away or be converted. Also, I've been working recently on future outdoor water use prediction methodologies. I've worked with Aurora on this, actually. I believe Tim was involved with this too a couple of years ago, coming up with an approach for basically predicting, what the development pipeline for Aurora is going to look like in terms of outdoor water consumption, and how that would look. And we actually looked under 50 different scenarios, how the total outdoor water use would look under different climate change, different xeriscaping scenarios, different lot size scenarios, and irrigation efficiency, things like that. So yeah, it's an area I'm very, very interested in. And one other area I'm working on recently is just looking at better understanding. I've been working a little bit with Denver Water on this. Greg has been involved on this. It's the role of shade in mitigating water demand for landscapes. It's actually very, very poorly understood. And I've got a paper that's hopefully coming out soon that shows it's actually really incredibly powerful. Shade is huge in mitigating demand for water use. And it's not something that's been well quantified up to now. So in terms of my what I want to see on the landscape, I mean, it's kind of all been said already. That's what happened. I'll just say everything that was said before. And, but I guess if I were to add my own little, aside to that, I personally like heterogeneity in the landscape. I like, I think the last thing we all want to see is one giant open grass field. Whether you like grass or not, we don't just like seeing uniform landscapes, and heterogeneity, diversity in the landscape is great, both vertically and horizontally, and as in terms of colors and species and all those kinds of things. It makes it much more of a human scale, makes it much more interactable. I think we all like those kinds of landscapes. Another thing I think I like to see, I love to see trees. I'm actually, my background before urban planning was in forestry. And so I do love trees, and I think, better understanding how many trees we can really support in this landscape is really critical, because they provide so many services. And the word strategic has come up a few times. I really, agree that, I think we've talked about functionality, we've talked about beauty. So it's that balancing of the poetical and the functional, I think, is really important. But that strategic side of the functional part is really critical about, like, if you are going to put a tree in and that's going to use a lot of water, let's make sure to put it in a place where it's providing the maximum amount of shade benefit for our structure that might bring down our energy bill, or for our landscape to help allow us to grow a greater variety of things. Another thing I'd love to see in our landscape is connectivity. Hasn't been mentioned that much, but just landscapes where we know that there's some way for some level of wildlife to get through to corridors and things like that, some connection to larger natural areas. And yeah, so I'd say that's about it on the what I want to see. That and garden gnomes. I like garden gnomes and flamingos. Those are good too. Ability, something landscapes to maintain, to have longevity. I think it's one thing, as someone who's put in done a lot of landscaping on my own yard, I realized that something looks great in day one and it may be all dead in a year. And so having landscapes that have longevity, that have resiliency to them, that anticipate changes to the climate, all really important, that are amenable to stewardship by the community, really important, I think. Also, public facing. I think we have, what's really interesting about landscapes in the typical American city is there's a mix of a lot of the beauty and the benefits of landscaping are private facing. And then we have another realm that's public facing. And I think we need to kind of think about how we split up investments between those. One thing I think is really interesting moving forward is the role of common areas that aren't necessarily city-owned. So we typically think of the public lands as your public right-of-way and your parks, but what about all these HOAs and subdivisions and planned unit developments that are going in where there's common land units, common open spaces that are being managed for entire communities, often with input from the entire HOA or community. I think those are kind of the wave of the future, and we want to think about what we want those to look like and who maintains them, how we maintain them, and how they're composed. So I'm trying to think if there's, and then the final thing I'll say is just like high use areas. I think we really need to think about, how we really target landscaping investment at high use areas where there's a need and where there's an equity component to it. So for instance, been talking with RTD recently about, their bus stops, about how we can potentially do some analysis to better understand, where there is, high heat land bus stops, for instance, where landscaping could serve multiple purposes to make it more beautiful, but also more moderate microclimate. So thinking about high use areas and how we direct landscape investments there, I think is a critical value. And I will leave it at that and say thank you. And now I think we're done.
That was really, really quite wonderful. I have a long history in doing value-based planning and value-based research, and I just love all of that. And I will somehow synthesize it and share it with you all. I don't know yet, but I think our next, Russ, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we were going to take a quick break. What do you want to do at this point in terms of timing?
I think we're good to just take a 10-minute break. We've been on for a minute, and we can, I think we should be able to end a little bit early today, not go to the full 5, but you know, if we are not if we're bumping up against 5, I think we're still covered to take the 10 now.
All right. Thank you, everyone. So let's take a 10-minute break. Let's come back at, that would be 3:05. No, wait, that'd be 20 minutes. Sorry. 56, 2:56. There we go. Can get my clock right. And we'll pick up on the next part.
like we're about time. So, am I tracking right, Marjo? Okay. All right. We'll go ahead and dive into it, so in hopes that we can get out a little earlier and just use our time effectively. I wanted to just kind of go over a little bit, as I noted earlier, we do, or we have done one-on-one interviews with all 21 of you. I think I was on 20 of 21 of those. So Val, sorry, I missed yours. It was the only one I couldn't make, but I think Kat was probably on every single one of them. So it's been a big time commitment, but very rewarding, just in the way that last conversation was. It was really nice to connect with each of you. I wanted to just maybe briefly walk through the topics that we discussed that we had teed up for this group, kind of a little bit of a quick download, maybe just on the fly of what I heard based on my notes. Some I think tracks very well with what you just discussed, and a little bit about how that made us think about process. And then I'm gonna turn things back over to Marjo after that to walk us through an exercise that kind of speaks to that. So let's go ahead and dive in. So we outlined a series of things. I think we have about 8 things here, but the first thing that we talked with each of you about that we had teed up was just technical implementation and capacity. This was the kind of discussion around, you know, whether you've signed on to the 30% MOU or whether you haven't, or you just want to try something in your community, or you're concerned about, you know, how you're going to start landscape transformation. How do we actually do the thing? What does that mean, boots on the ground? I think we had some interest in people wanting to hear what others had been doing, and what, you know, maybe their lessons learned, or what was working well for them, or maybe what wasn't. I'm trying to think of some of the things that came up in this bucket. Let me scroll back to my notes. So some of the things we talked about, I guess, curiosity to see what others are doing, capacity limitations. A lot of you mentioned that, just the need for additional training, wondering if the state had a better role in helping support training. I think there was just a lingering question, you know, how to get that out there. I think we maybe heard both sides of the equation of, should we have a requirement for training or not? You know, were there better ways to do that, or was that inequitable or not? I think in general, like maybe a lot of industries are just struggling with workforce at all, let alone trained workforce. One of the neat things I think we heard in this category was to watch out for the little guy, kind of a sentiment that if it was hard for Denver Water, it's even harder for somebody else maybe, or certainly if you have a bigger budget, maybe you can do things, whereas if you're you know, a smaller utility, for example, or smaller community, doesn't have as much of a budget or tax base or what have you, it just may be harder, especially when you're, you know, the compounding effects of maybe these other things we just spoke through, of not having capacity or not having, you know, qualified, certified people that can do some of the work. And then I think just a general nod, and this probably is a theme across a lot of these, that it's easier to do this work on the front end, that, you know, we should put some time into not letting turf in the first place. Again, I had quoted that earlier, of putting in the landscapes that serve us and stop putting in the ones that don't. And I heard a lot about that just in what you all said. And it makes me think a lot of, you know, in the water plan vernacular, like multi-purpose, multi-benefits, like how are we going to get the most out of our landscapes, and thinking about, you know, landscapes that benefit, you know, both water reductions, water quantity, water conservation, but also water quality and stormwater protection. You know, landscapes that are conserving water, but also conserving energy, landscapes that are good for people, but also for pollinators, or other wildlife. This next one, I'll click to, so I'm going to have to awkwardly go back and forth between screens, but defining non-essential turf. So House Bill 22-1151 has the term in it, non-essential turf. Many of you, and you spoke to this today as well, were more comfortable with the term non-functional turf, or it seemed to resonate more. And so, you know, we could talk about, do we need to define both or just lean in on one? But I think this was a space we were curious about, if that definition that's in 22-1151 was robust enough. And we can, you know, maybe don't need to do it right now, but at a future meeting, maybe we'll bust out that definition and kind of walk through that. Some of the things that we heard is, you know, whatever definition we come up with, we might want it to be fairly broad. And we talked about pros and cons of that. If you make something too broad, it could, you know, create a lot of loopholes. But if you make it too stringent, we could end up injuring things we didn't intend to. For example, whether this is the right or wrong tool or needs further research, but something like a grass swale and a stormwater BMP is a pretty common practice and does have a benefit. So maybe we don't want to limit that, or maybe we do, or maybe that needs more research. I know Northern Water had talked a lot about maybe being able to do something different in detention ponds. We need to consider what we want. I think we heard a lot about that. More of this opportunity space. You all just spoke to this a little bit too, in the talking about enhancing, right, and not losing. And so I think that a lot of time, and what do we really want to get out of our landscapes? We heard a lot about, again, drought resilient, but flood resilient. We talked about not losing our trees, making sure that we were having those cooling benefits from vegetation writ large, and then certainly trees as well. Talked about benefits from pollinators, and we heard a little bit about what we don't want, right? So the converse of many of those things like tree death. We don't want to lose our canopy in the urban setting. And one thing that I hadn't even really thought through too, but somebody had brought up, if we're removing turf, some of the go-to options for doing that might include using Roundup. And what's the impact of that if we're putting a bunch of Roundup in our communities, and what does that mean for our waterways? So we need to really think holistically about kind of both sides of that coin and really make sure that we're making smart decisions. And I think that was some of the discussion that kind of came out of this definition. And again, something that you all touched on again today, and again, probably a pretty consistent theme in here, was just the need for continued outreach and education. That there's still, whether it's the new folks moving here, like Pat had mentioned, or whether it's, just people having a misconception about xeriscape, if that's still the right term, if, a lot of people say zeroscape and it's not trying to get to zero. We want some water, it's the right amount of water. And that's a hard conversation, but also inherently helping people understand that is beautiful. And we heard a lot today about that and the flexibility around it. Land use and water development, we talked a lot about this one, and I'll click back over to my notes here. It was kind of in the context a bit of new construction too, that we're spending, and a lot of the discussions we're having inherently are in that retrofit space, but whether that's new construction in the existing built environment and you're redeveloping, or whether it's a completely new development, and as Pat spoke to, you're buying a parcel. How do we do that? How do we make connections maybe with tap fees to incentivize the kind of changes we want? I think you heard today, and I remember Pat saying that developers are already starting to build different, and we'll really have to continue to adapt just to be able to advance projects. And the ramifications of not making those adjustments really could have negative impacts to housing affordability. We heard a little bit interesting kind of conversation of not everyone, and specifically thinking about municipalities or utilities have a land use authority. And so what are the ways, where can they still be effective? And I think we heard the converse of that too, is that I remember one of you said, well, I think people have a lot more power than they might realize. So there was some interesting connections there that I think it will be neat for this group to dive into more. I think that there is a sentiment here that there are opportunities to work with new developments, new construction, and really kind of target solutions that pay dividends. For one, I thought this was a pretty cool idea, but because this can be so amorphous, big scale and conceptual, that one approach might be to focus on area types. So, would it just be a win if we said, we really want to do something about medians, and surely there should be a median standard? Or I believe Austin, and he maybe alluded to this a little bit in his recent comments about common spaces and new development, and how there's probably a big opportunity there, that there's, kind of these several different types. I think Austin had mentioned there are about 15 types of kind of these repeating themes that you see in new developments, and maybe there's a way to influence those common spaces. And I think you also heard from Pat a willingness to kind of look at that and maybe some, really new design ideas there. The next one I will click to was model landscape ordinances. That one, and I think remiss in our thanks early on not to note some of our partners. We've got some folks on the transportation side. We got some folks on landscape side and on Department of Local Affairs side that are also listening into this and have been kind of thinking about things on the back end. In this case, Department of Local Affairs is in the middle of updating their model landscape ordinance. Some of the thoughts that we had here were, there are many of these out there, and so it may not be that this group needs to think about, you know, a new one per se, but might be about identifying the best opportunities. Certainly some interest around what DOLA is doing. I think some interest in maybe for those groups that are in the process of updating theirs, are there abilities to partner or provide funding for different groups? And maybe this kind of speaks to was just saying this about, I think Drew was saying, I hope we don't have to do this alone. Maybe some connectivity, thinking about utilities or municipalities that could work together on a model landscape ordinance and really put that in place. We heard some good thoughts around, sometimes it's not the issue that it's out there, it's about the firepower or the people power to actually, or the know-how in some cases, maybe just providing some capacity to support to actually get those changes into codes. It's one thing to write, you know, an ordinance or a code. It's another thing to kind of put that into practice, and making sure that we do that thoughtfully was something that we talked about. I think there was an interesting idea in there too about, you know, again, maybe working with DOLA and finding out if there's ways to bolster funding on that capacity side. So some of the things that we heard there. Colorado water budget and landscapes, kind of really thinking about, I think what we heard in this space, in this conversation, was really thinking about water budgets and maybe a desire for more municipalities, utilities to consider water budgets. I think we had heard in our landscape summit, folks like Colorado Springs talking about a much quicker speed of change at a much cheaper cost if we could more effectively use rates and things like water budgets. You know, on a state scale, could we come to some kind of consensus about what I think there was a desire to look at water waste or egregious use? Like, what is that maximum gallons per square foot? When you see it, you're just like, that's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous number. And I can just think about my experience in Boulder. I mean, we knew what our highest playing fields used, and I would think over that amount would probably be a flag. I think there was some desire to go the other way too. Not again, you know, this isn't regulating change or setting policy, but at least to kind of put some numbers that people could point to. There's a desire also to look at how low we could go. I think we heard an example about Denver Green Codes updating their standards and having 7 gallons per square foot on average. So some desire to look at both ends of the spectrum there, some appetite for digging into and maybe defining a little bit what water waste is, or trying to put some parameters around that. The next one, equitable transformation. So really thinking about what are the main equity concerns? So I think Greg Fisher noted some of this and asked, you know, or stated he didn't think this conflicted with our mission at all. I would say absolutely not. This is a concern. And I think we talked a lot about having a more thoughtful conversation here. Some of the kind of notes I took were equity is a concern, but sometimes the go-to solutions may not actually be the logical or even most helpful solutions at the end of the day. So for example, if we are, as Kate had kind of talked about, if we're not saving water, why are we doing a thing? Rebates are generally designed, for example, to save water. And our lowest income, poorest community members aren't often the ones that are the ones with the highest water bills, or if they are, that may be due to a leak or something, certainly. But in general, I think you know, our community members that have been able to pay for a higher water bill and have a bigger landscape to begin with are the ones that we really need to drive use down on. And so that opened up some interesting conversation about the people that maybe didn't matter how high the water use got, wouldn't pay. And if there was some appetite for this group to think about, you know, how do you even address that? Whereas in general, water budgets might actually offer a way to disproportionately put costs on the higher users, in some cases, the more wasteful users, and create a lower budget at the, you know, for low income or those that are really hyper efficient without, you know, people making those choices to just not water, right? And then we talked a lot about, I think, kind of, again, at the Landscape Summit, Peter Mayer may have said this best, but some community members, especially those that maybe have decided not to water for economic reasons, are not you know, prime candidates for turf removal because they may not have turf to begin with. So it may be I think we heard Greg and Sinceri speak to this a little bit too, but adding a water demand. And I don't think that adds a water demand overall necessarily if you're bringing down, but at that lot size location or a park location, you may not be trying to get to the optimal level of efficiency. You may be trying to add water that actually gives some greenery, that provides a tree or trees or provides a garden, and that we need to think, and as we have this conversation, at least set the stage for even if it's maybe outside of a little bit of the scope of kind of just traditional rebates, what are the other things that people looking at this discussion should be considering as a suite of things that start to offer and really address equity issues? I think that was kind of on my notes there. So I'll go to this last one. Water affordability and tap fees. You heard Pat talk about that and talk about his concern. I thought there was actually some really rich discussion here and some really good thinking of just almost kind of tying back to that water budget. Was there a way or could there be ways, or some of you may have figured it out traditionally? I think you have a tap fee based on a pipe size of delivery, but in some places we heard, I know Drew and others talked about, already looking at what that need was at the property and maybe adjusting. Others had talked about if you could commit to a lower usage, could you tie for some period of time or potentially even in perpetuity a lower demand to that tap, and then if it was exceeded, maybe the ultimate long-term at least has a financial incentive not to ever exceed that, or potentially pays increased fees. So there were certainly some ties to water, using tap fees more effectively to offer them at potentially a cheaper rate that could benefit low-income housing, for example, but also really made those ties to the landscapes in more effective ways than perhaps has been traditionally done, or at least traditionally done at scale. So there are opportunities to think more broadly. And then I think our last topic we just brought up was resilient funding for drought. And really just here, I suppose anything that we've talked about fits into this. You could talk about that with the tap fees, water rates is one. Talked about, maybe sometimes the economic decision or the economics of things interfere with wanting to declare a drought because you are inherently decreasing revenues. And maybe that is something that could use some discussion. There's also some really thoughtful discussion, I think, and I think we heard some today about, our communities are interdependent. There's also a thought of, we really need to think how water is moving from one community to another, but there's also this need to shift the discussion because, really should be about ongoing investments in water conservation. And this, I think, kind of opened up a nice space to really talk about those low, still maybe low hanging fruits that aren't necessarily widely adopted, like water waste ordinances or standard days per week watering. And maybe, are there things that this group could discuss that just are maybe no brainers that everyone should adopt? Potentially was an idea. Because making a drought restriction in the middle of a drought in the peak of summer doesn't necessarily add or do much for water and stream was one kind of piece of the discussion. Whereas if you're invested and have been investing for years, your ability to balance the system or even add water to stream might be greater. Water rates are a piece of this, continued conservation, water waste ordinances. There's just a variety of tools that we could be brought to bear in this discussion. And perhaps this is one, or maybe we touch on all of these as well at the Drought Summit. But these were kind of the bucket of things that were teed up for this group to dig into, and a little bit of a flavor of some of the convergence of thoughts and maybe in some cases divergence of thought that we heard around these topics. And maybe I'll just pause there and say, Marjo, Kat, Kat was on every one of these, and Marjo read through all of our notes and were helping us synthesize. Are there any other key takeaways that you wanted to highlight?
I think you hit everything I would touch on, Russ. Thanks.
Okay. Well, then in the interest of time, we'll say what this made us think through and just kind of digesting all that is that some of the topics and input we discussed really may be better framed up as lenses. So for example, if we're thinking about that capacity, maybe that kind of cuts across these topics. And there were many other things that you all brought up that really potentially almost take that kind of lens or really a criteria for evaluating a concept and the merit of it, or is it scalable? We heard a lot about that from you today in your comments as well. Again, that concept of watch out for the little guy. If this is a great idea for a big organization, but can it really play out for everybody, or do we need to be thoughtful about that? So it just really made us realize we need to maybe spend some time. And what we'd like to do next with you is kind of have you think through how we interpreted what you said in terms of these criteria for evaluation, and say, are these the right things? Are these the kind of set of things that we should be considering? And I will show you what that looks like here, and I'll turn things back over to Marja to walk through these.
Thanks, Russ. So just in terms of process, just for a moment, we have been working through sort of what some of the discussions may be, because I'm sure that's a question you're asked, like, well, what are we going to talk about? And we needed a little more time after the interviews to actually really dive in and think about how to divide it across multiple meetings. So we will be getting back to you with that for feedback. But one of the areas we did sort of narrow down as we were going through all of the different, through the different input, was this sense of maybe some of the ideas that we're having need to be ways in which we evaluate or review collectively as a group different ideas. So we came up with this idea of, we want as a group as a whole to be able to, have discussions that assess these different ideas that you recommend, propose, but use a common set of criteria to sort of run through a discussion so that we can have some kind of apples to apples like discussion. We're going to go through an exercise where we actually put you into breakouts to add your thoughts to these potential criteria, because ultimately we want you to feel comfortable using them. By no means do we want to create, a PhD level evaluation matrices. Like, that's not the goal. It's really to have some common terminology and sort of some check boxes to say, well, did we look through this and consider this? So it's sort of a considerations evaluation criteria of sorts. And I'm going to walk through them because they kind of relate back to some of the things you've said today, as well as some of the things that Russ just said. So what we will be asking you to do, let me give you the instructions before I explain them, because then maybe it'll all make more sense. We're going to ask you to go into breakouts and look at these and say, are these the right criteria? Like that on this left column, do those make sense that will help us have productive, structured discussions? And then the descriptions, we're beginning to get at like what they actually mean. Just having listened to you talk about some of the ideas that you have for landscapes, like I already think I would make a recommendation to modify one of them. So looking at water savings impact, it was like the level of savings. Well, what you really all talked about was sustained savings. And that's different than it's just low, medium, or high. So we're looking for you to kind of provide some feedback and input on those descriptions, as well as whether the criteria are the appropriate criteria, about how we as a group want to go through these structured assessments of our ideas. So some of these came out of the notes from the interviews. And in particular, some of the things that we heard from all of you that we've put in here as criteria or lenses were these ideas around local control and ensuring that there's, decision-making autonomy, the applicability across the region. And I thought of that in terms of breadth and depth, but maybe it's more regional. Maybe there's a better way that we capture the good ideas of what you just talked about today. Like I was thinking there's, applicability to different entities would be one. There's just these great ideas out there, or great practices that are already well established. We know a lot about them. We know how they work. They would just help the state overall if it was widespread. And I always think of like daytime of week watering. You'd be surprised at how many people don't have that in their codes. The other is more on depth, and some of you are diving really, really deep and are much beyond where a lot of the municipalities are around the state. And you're sort of on the leading front edge of how projects are getting, how innovation is occurring. And it may or may not be applicable to everyone, but it might be applicable to some who have the capacity. And so capacity kind of came in as one of those requirements in terms of not everyone can do everything. It would be great if they could, but we know we have capacity gaps as we look across the state and across different sizes, entities, and et cetera. So those really came out of a lot of the ideas that you guys provided in those stakeholder interviews. Budget implications, like, is it affordable? What kind of budgets? Like, many communities don't even have water conservation officers. So how do we think about some of the recommendations from looking through the lens of how much it costs, impacts on, we've talked, I think you all might be able to come up with better ways to think about how we want to think about the impact in equity questions. We kind of took a stab here, but it might be the wrong descriptions. And so maybe those impact on vulnerable and lower income populations might be more about ensuring that there is access to natural landscapes or greenscapes or parkscapes, and it's more equally distributed, and it's less about the cost burden to a household. Housing affordability and drought were both part of what this group was tasked at in making a connection to landscapes. And then lastly, this idea of like, we don't want to create any unintended consequences. I don't know what those are. So how do we even begin to identify what an unintended consequence might be? Potentially it is, we look at each one and just use it as a lens and say, will there be any unintended consequences from this? So those are where these have come from. There might be some missing, I just thought of functionality was one that was really important in the values. Maybe that needs to be a criteria component. You also mentioned like it implements and builds on existing efforts. There were many things that you wrote that might fit in here better. And so what we'd like you to do, if you're game, is to take about, I don't know, there's a couple ways I can make us do this maybe and still work on time, but we need probably about 30 to 35 minutes, I'm assuming, to do this exercise. And your instructions are to review these. And I'm going to take you into a whiteboard to show you how to do that, and then bring it back and do a report back on some recommendations for what you would want to change. I think in the essence of time, what I'll likely do is we're going to break you into 3 breakout groups. And what I will likely do is task group 1 with the first 3 criteria where you start. Group 2 will start with readiness for implementation, capacity requirements, and improved state and local resilience, and you'll start there. And then group 3 will start with cost or budget implications and do those 4. If you get to all of them, great, but at least then we'll have covered them all. To do this exercise, I'm going to introduce you to a virtual whiteboard. Some of you have worked with me before. You're going to be experts in this, so you get to help your teams. I'm looking at you, Waverly and Tori, to use a whiteboard that we'll be able to use in future meetings. So some of this exercise is also helping us get oriented to the way we'll work when we do virtual meetings, so that we can be as productive as possible. So I'm going to share my screen for a moment.
Hey, Marjo, before you do, I'll stop sharing, but I think Laura had a question.
Oh, yes.
Oh, Laura, I think you're on mute still.
I am on mute. Thank you. Yeah, thanks. Thank you for that, Marjo. And I'm not trying to derail the process. I just wanted to note, like, the way my brain works, I'm having a little hard time thinking about evaluation criteria without like first have kind of started to outline like the things we want to talk about. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, fair. That is fair. We have not created all the buckets, but I think you can probably be like take a couple of thoughts with you as you start to think about it. I think one will definitely be, like, for example, let's just say like the value of promoting, a proposal is the value of promoting conservation rate structures as a best practice in Colorado, and that is the model, and there's some target, you know, structures that I'm making this up because we don't have them yet. But that would be one, like what lens would you look through that to sort of assess the benefits to the state as a whole to kind of having that as a best practice. Or for example, you know, many of you were just talking about the different places that we could apply, you know, where would we begin working in promoting, you know, this new landscape. And you had a lot of continuity in what those landscapes look like, but maybe it would be, you know, we're going to just talk about public spaces in terms of right-of-ways, public spaces, and parks. And we're going to say we want to make a recommendation that, you know, across the state of Colorado, that these are the best practices in managing those landscapes that we want you to, and that's a proposal on the table and we have to evaluate it. So that's sort of what the criteria would be used for. We don't have our recommendations yet, but that's sort of what I'm thinking they'll be used for, if that's helpful.
And maybe I can just add to that, is those items I list and kind of read through our notes, those are the things that we've effectively been tasked with digging into. I think what we saw and what Marge has been really helpful in thinking about is just, we got so much, I think we universally heard, like, this is a great list of things. We should definitely talk about these. If anything, it's an aggressive list. It's a lot to get through in a little bit of time. So how do we kind of bundle those? So I think that's what we're trying to do. And that got us to this point of saying, well, maybe, like, for example, things that you'll see on here, like capacity or equity, are not necessarily a topic. There's something that maybe applies to all those things. So maybe part of breaking down that list of 8 things into a shorter list is coming up with the screening tools. And so, you know, as Marjo said, you may add things like, if you want to add, there's a lot of good chat in the dialogue about marketability. I mean, that could be a way that you want to look at this, if you're just going to apply the ability to do that, or the preference for doing that into these too. So our thought was that rather than just plowing right through to those 8 buckets, then maybe creating these parameters would give us a way to thoughtfully disaggregate those and know where to plug in the good input that you had.
Kind of like principles of sorts. I guess we could call them a lot of things. All right. Does it make sense enough that you feel comfortable kind of going into a breakouts for a discussion? Do I see heads nodding? I'm trying to, okay, I see thumbs now. Okay, great. All right, well, let me show you what you're going to do, because I'm also introducing you to a tool called Mural. Hopefully some of you have seen it during your COVID days, but it's essentially a whiteboard that you use in a virtual space. So I am going to share it right now, and I'm going to demonstrate a little bit of how it works. So you should be seeing a screen. The links to these rooms for when we go into the breakout are in the agenda. We're going to tell you what rooms you're in. Actually, you'll be invited into the rooms. Sam will invite you into the rooms, but essentially there is, within Mural, it's like, think of it like you're sitting in a room together and it's this massive whiteboard. So hopefully, are you guys seeing me scrolling on this? I can't see what you're saying. Okay. So first off, just how do you use Mural? There's a toolbar on the left-hand side that will pop up, and I should probably make that larger so you can see what I'm doing. Can you see that? So there is, that's where you guys are. There, how's that? Now you can see it. So there's a toolbar on the left-hand side that essentially has, the only 2 that you really need are a sticky note or a text box, so that you can put information. That's how you use your pen on a virtual whiteboard. The easiest way to actually create a sticky note is just to double click, and a double click will create a sticky note, and you can just write in it. it gives you a little cursor and you write, and you can drag it around just like you would move a sticky note anywhere else. You can change the colors through this if you want to get really fancy. We do not need to get fancy in this meeting. I can send you a different practice mural. All I want you to do today is to be able to make some comments on the criteria. And to do that, you need either a sticky note, or you have an option of using a text box. And the way that you access the text box is to click on this little text, and then you create a paragraph. And this paragraph then can be resized, but essentially Frank knows how to use this too. You got 3 people in here who know how to use this. Type in a text box, and again, you can move it, you can resize it, although you don't need to make it bigger. But that's the 2 ways in which you can write content on this. You can all do it simultaneously. You'll be invited in via this link. In terms of practicing, oops, that's supposed to be locked down. You can, where is my lock this down? I'll do that before you guys start. So on this side is the criteria. And essentially what we want you to do is, your instructions are in here in case it's not clear, but to just pick a team leader to lead your discussion. Pick someone from your team to be the reporter of any comments that you guys want to share at the end. And in general, if there's real specific things that you've rewritten, those will be captured in your notes, and I will have access to those, and we'll modify this draft set of criteria. But if there's really big thematic things, like we've added some things, or we did a little bit of wordsmithing, overall, we feel like it worked, or no, we do not feel like it worked. Like, those are the general types of feedback that we want when you come back. I don't need every subject edit, but just sort of the general overall approval and things that you need to make it so that we will all approve of using it. So you want two people to be tasked with leadership and reporting, and then just take a minute to read it, because you all need a moment, and then work together to sort of generally say, of the criteria that are listed, you know, are those going to work, or do we need more? Are those generally good enough? And then with the descriptions, how would you change them? And that you go to town. Like, I will work with whatever you guys feel is right for you, and sort of working through this process. And if we need to modify them once we get into the process and are actually applying them, we can modify them then as well. But I'd like to start the process with some general agreement around how we want to look at proposals and recommendations. So, questions? Willingness to try? All right. The one other thing I didn't show you was, if you right click on this, it has a section called Add a Comment. You can also add a comment by having them numbered, and I will have access to being able to read those. So 3 ways to make comments. If you don't want to use the whiteboards at all, as a group, you can just simply have the discussion, just have someone write down notes that they can share with me. That's the most important thing, is I get that feedback back. Okay, all right.
Marjo, I was gonna, just for reference, since we don't have it in this, I'll put in the chat, and I don't know if we, at least our facilitators for each of the breakouts can copy these over if they want, but I'll just put those kind of 8 themes, and I flagged the ones that maybe seem potentially more primed to be a criteria than a topic specific thing.
Okay. That's great. All right, so I will be popping between the rooms just to make sure you understand the instructions, to answer any questions, to help you if you are using Zoom or Mural. And, you know, I think in terms of time, it's 3:35. Are you all right going to 4:05? That's about 40 minutes. We think we can do it in that time. That will keep us on schedule. Okay. All right. Sam, will you initiate, just for, I don't know if we have observers on this meeting, but if you are an observer, we are going into these breakouts, and will not be putting the observers in the breakout, but we will invite you to stay put and be present when we come back for the report back.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll get this picked up here in the breakout rooms. Just for reference, I think on the sheet, if you end up in my room, I think that is room 1. With Kat, it'll be room 2, and with Russ, room 3, just in terms of the agenda on what we follow. So I'll open those up right now. We all start smoothly. See you shortly.
I just want to start by saying I'm really bad at clicking on the sticky note thing. That was very challenging.
Not difficult, Laura. User error.
Rooms are trickling back in. It violently yanks you out after 60 seconds.
Hey, since I basically went last in introductions, can I go first in recapping?
Yes.
Wait a second, wasn't it Austin?
I said basically went last.
Oh.
Austin, are you presenting for your group?
No, I'm not. So
yeah. See, there you
formula
go.
is ruined.
We're going snake draft style.
All right. Are we all back? I'm trying to see if all the breakout rooms are. Looks like we might all be back. I don't see anybody hanging on. Okay. Yes. Go to gallery view. There we go. Okay. Now I can kind of see all of you. Great. So to keep us kind of moving, and we want to get you out as soon as possible, but still get some substance, I was able to pop into all of the rooms, and already you were in deep, really interesting discussions. And so why don't we start with room 3, then we'll do room 1, and then we'll do, room 2, and then room 1. We'll go in reverse order, 3, 2, 1. So room 3.
Drew reporting out for room 3. We got stuck in the very beginning about trying to get our heads around like what exactly these criteria were and what we were going to be measuring. And I think just for the future, it'd be helpful to understand sort of a couple things for us to be like, how does this work and what are we here for and trying to do with these criteria? We started down on cost and budget and quickly noted that cost for whom. We should probably differentiate between a cost to the utility, to the homeowner, to the park district that's doing the work. I mean, who else, right, is spending money to do this? And then also noted, well, hey, just because something is expensive in cost doesn't necessarily mean it would be bad. What if it like is really expensive but super powerful and moves the needle a lot? And so we kind of got into a conversation about like the value more in the financial sense. If this is a good thing, maybe that's another criteria. Maybe the value context here is more than just monetary. Maybe it's triple bottom line. Is it a return on investment? What are the other kinds of things there associated with cost and budget? So that was probably our most robust and concrete conversation about how we could improve one of these criteria. The other ones just got a lot harder. Impact on vulnerable and lower income populations. We wanted to flip the script here. Maybe the concept is the benefit for vulnerable and lower income populations. And we didn't necessarily think that this could only be a cost burden. We wanted to get rid of this idea of we're listing out the rates or giveaways and maybe move to a place where this was a more narrative kind of criteria, where we're talking about the implications of this particular thing that we're evaluating on lower income populations. There might be significant benefits, there might be significant drawbacks, and it was sort of hard for us to figure out how to use this as a low, medium, high criteria. Similar kind of thing on housing affordability. We recognize the governor does like this a lot, but there's a deep skepticism that just because water use goes down or a fee is lower, that actually has any direct impact on the end user and the sale price of the home. But looking out a little bit farther in the sort of the life of the home, a lower water using landscape is going to be more affordable over the long run if the water bills are lower. So that was another one where we were just like, oh, is this really the thing? And wrapping it up with unintended consequences, we felt that this would be good to sort of define in the analysis, to list these out, and may also be appropriate to think about the flip side of this. Well, what are the potential for unintended benefits of this kind of thing? And good luck guessing what the future is. This is the classic black, the known knowns and the unknown knowns, that thing. So those were our 4. I felt like we could have talked for a couple hours on this, but off to room 2.
Awesome. Well, I drew the short straw for room 2, or was voluntold. Yeah, we tackled readiness for implementation, capacity requirement, and improve local resiliency. So I'm going to start at the top with readiness and then kind of work my way down. Group, feel free to jump in, like I said, when I miss things, because it is an inevitability that I will, because of the discussion we had. But we really liked the category of readiness for implementation or adoption. We saw this as a great way to prioritize maybe some of the outcomes of our group. If something is ready to go from day one, we feel like that should have a high priority for implementation. We saw some risks to this with if local governments actually have jurisdictional control over all of their water service territory. That is not common for a lot of our territories. So it feels to us like the cities who have what we call a one-to-one relationship with land use control and water utility control have a higher likelihood of implementing things than maybe cities who don't. So again, just a note there. When we looked at capacity requirement, we kind of spent some time trying to define what that was. And we kind of broke it into, I would call 3 buckets, if you will. One is a financial capacity to make the change. The second is a human capacity. Do we have the people to make the change, or the people who are going to implement the change trained to implement the change? And then and then the last one, is there a political desire or a political capacity to want to make the change? And so we thought about maybe adding those topics in there. And then last, with improving resiliency, we liked adding ecosystems as well to the resiliency language, not just communities, but ecosystems as well. And then we had maybe a terminology change there. Instead of drought, water shortage. In situations where, like, we had the High Peak Fire, the Cameron Peak Fire, that maybe wasn't a water shortage, but the ability, or a drought, but the ability to use the water was limited because of water quality. So we liked maybe a definitional change there. Let's see, what else? Group, did I capture everything? Did I miss anything from that? Seeing none, hearing none. I think that's it. That was group 2.
Room 1.
Just thumbs up from Kat, so it must mean I got everything.
All right. I got voluntold too. I think I took the most people's ideas that talked on. I was like, that's a good idea. I'll write it down. So maybe that's how I got chosen to talk. All right. So group 1, first 3 criteria. I'll echo Drew that we definitely spent some time at the beginning just trying to get context of what we're talking about. So that took us a while just to visualize what this meant, especially because we were starting with water savings impact as the first criteria, because I think high, medium, and low kind of was tough for us because there's a bigger question of how you measure water savings, and there's all sorts of things that may not have water savings measure, like, that are quantifiable, I guess. So we talked a little bit about whether water savings is like the most important. I think we came back at the end to saying, but it's very, very important. So it was the first one we talked about. It's what we spent most of the time talking about. We did want to capture that there are other benefits. So even if water savings impact is low, I think I started like a brainstorm list of other benefits: ecological, another group said water quality, stormwater, recreation. Andrea added your compact compliance idea, equity. There's some other benefits, and for different communities, their water savings impact may not be their top priority always, but also at the same time, water savings impact and then other stuff, I think, in a different category. Let's see, so the applicability to different size entities and local governments. There's some good language that we wrote down about needing to meet communities where they are. I don't think we necessarily took issue with the way that it was described in there, so maybe that's already buried in there, but we did spend a lot of time talking about that importance of different levels of capacity. So I think that actually maybe feeds into capacity discussions from the other group too. And then balancing, we need to meet communities where they are, to also like low-hanging fruit. There are some basic things that we think that should get done. So even if a community where they are is like not doing anything, we do want to take it past that. So we want to bring the low-hanging fruit, like folks, to doing something, which feeds into the supports values of local control. That's the third one that we looked at. And I think that feeds in because we were wondering like what that balance is with having some statewide, whether it's guidance or some statewide bars that we set. But that also fed into the how you measure those kind of bar questions. One thing we were hoping that this group would discuss at some point was whether or not this group imagines that we're like precluding any statewide solution type recommendations. I wrote down like whatever the balance is between like a mandatory or flexible approach to recommendations. I don't know what this one is. Somebody else wrote like, how can the state help in general? Like, are we going to do, like, does the state create tools? Does it give funding? Does it set some sort of guidance or policy? Does it do all those things, I guess? I think maybe I'll stop there. There were we barely made it to some other. Well, actually, someone has a note that we didn't talk about one of the other implementation actions, but I'm having trouble summarizing it. So maybe someone else can summarize something I missed. Otherwise, that's all I got.
Excellent. So yeah, sorry if that created confusion at the beginning, but a lot of the conversations you're having, the reason we want to have some of these up front is how do we kind of move into looking at all the different opportunities that are out there and comparing them and assessing them as you make recommendations. So this was a draft completely to start with. We'll come back with something in a different framework and continue to revise it so that we can at least, you know, when we write a final report saying we kind of evaluated or assessed or use this as discussion guidance in selecting these particular recommendations. So thanks for bearing through that, but you guys did great. It was actually a really good outcome of that. And I appreciate all of your hard thinking. And I'm going to turn it over to Russ. Close us out.
Yeah, and I'll just keep it short so that we can all get a little bit of time back in our day. Thanks so much again for just hanging with us and for working through that. I think it was actually really informative. We'll take this, digest it, see how we can apply it. And I think in our future meetings, I think we're still working through exactly how we want the Drought Summit workshop piece to go, if we want to tackle a broader group of things or just boil it down to a thing. So we'll put some thought behind that. But either way, at our next meeting proper, our goal would be to maybe take 2 of those kind of bigger bucket of 8 things, maybe with some of the added input and nuance that's been provided across the one-on-one meetings and then some of the discussion today, and try to bucket those out into more manageable topics. And I think in doing so, we'll be able to kind of see, are these, you know, given some of the subtext in these discussions, are these still the right lenses to look at? And it might be kind of, as Laura had suggested, easier to apply them to a thing instead of talk about them in their own space. So that'll be the next steps. And then I think most of you are able to come to the Drought Summit. So again, just a reminder there, if you plan to and can support that workshop on day 1 and can be in the breakout session, let us know if you haven't registered and we'll work to make space for you, as we're already full up and have a wait list. But otherwise, that will be our next and most immediate step. And we'll take some of this digestive feedback and then looking just tentatively to get a doodle pull out, probably aiming to have another meeting with this group, perhaps near the end of June, as maybe a next step, potentially early July. Just always try to stay away. The 4th of July kind of week before and week after is famous for travel. And then we have board meeting and stuff like that too. So that's kind of give you some insight. I think our goal would be to try to iron out maybe our next, maybe all of those 4 to 6 meetings, and we'll kind of in that bucketing kind of decide ultimately how many we think that needs to be, and probably just try to schedule those all at once. And probably put a little bit of thought behind where, if we're going to meet in person, so that we can just get those on your calendars early. So that's kind of next steps for us. if you guys have any follow-up or something you sleep on or questions, you know, Kat, Marjo, and I are always open to getting those. And then we'll be just kind of working through this process and then tee things up and give you, for those of you that are coming to the Drought Summit, we'll know by the list, we'll kind of tee you up on the exercise that we're going to have there in advance of that. So that's the immediate next steps. Thanks so much for everything. It is really a great group that we have here, and I'm so appreciative and big fans of all of you. So thanks for the time and the brain power here.